I wanted to just share a little bit, or explore a little bit about, how we we're talking about Vedana, and so Vedana, feeling tone, usually defined as. So whether we find something essentially pleasurable, unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. It often, when I sort of first came across these categories, I thought it seemed slightly odd, a little bit sort of almost uninteresting. It's actually become one of my most interesting reflections on the Dharma, and the idea basically that all experience has an associated Vedana. Every experience that we have has an associated Vedana. Actually, these days, the neurologists will tell you that's how memory works. You have an experience of something, and what happens is it's tagged with an emotional sense, and it's that emotional sense that files it in our memory system. They talk about memories being tagged with emotional valence, and if there is no emotional valence, they drop out of memory. They don't go from short term into longer term memory, which is fascinating. But anyway, that's a different story. Let's not get too distracted. But yeah, so when what I find outdoors, we talked about the senses last Saturday, this sort of rich sensual experience. Well, there's things we find pleasurable that we're attracted to. I really enjoy birdsong, as many people do. So sitting here today, it's like part of my mind is drawn to the pleasurable experience. If you said, what did you enjoy? If you sort of asked me tomorrow, what did you enjoy about it? Or what do you remember about it? What do you remember about meditating this morning? Unfortunately, we lost the audio, but I'll remember the birdsong because I enjoyed it, found it pleasurable. The midges are very early in Scotland this year. Normally it's a bit later in the year. Midges are very small, for those of you who don't know the Scottish midge, and their bite is mildly annoying. And the problem is that they rarely come in ones. So one midge can be completely ignored. 1,000 is more of a challenge. Anyway, so they're up this morning. We just got the odd midgie bite, and they're a bit unpleasant. But actually what happens is your mind, a huge amount of the experience, your mind just filters out. So part of what we've been talking about yesterday and we're talking about today, and part of what we're doing in spending time outdoors, is actually consciously broadening our awareness of the sensory world and starting to include those things that we would normally naturally leave out. And it adds this incredible richness. That's like why I think the lockdown regular daily walk is really interesting, because you sort of keep revisiting and you keep rediscovering more and more richness. And I think that's one of the things I've enjoyed as the years have gone on in spending time in nature, is that my own ability to appreciate the richness of the moment and to settle into that unfolding moment has definitely increased. So there is a practice in this, isn't there?
Oh yeah.
So I think let's talk about the mind's tendency to seek the comfortable and the familiar. We talk about this as this is the familiarization or habituation is talked about in psychology, isn't it, these days? The way we look for the familiar. And we can control our environment so well that it's actually quite possible to continue. It's like we continue to seek the comfortable and the familiar, even though we don't need to. Even when the level of discomfort or unfamiliarity actually isn't a threat to us. So it's really, really important, isn't it, to be able to assess: am I safe? Am I safe? That's a really important assessment to make. But it's like quite habitually, we quite often just over control our environments. And I think, again, going outdoors is a really interesting way to discover not controlling your environment quite so much, and starting to really enjoy to enjoy that. Because certainly where we are in Scotland, most of the time it is safe. Actually, the Scottish countryside probably is one of the safest places in the world. We have to put locks on our solitary retreat cabins, not because anybody would need a lock, apart from the person who needs to feel safe in the solitary retreat. Because no one's ever going to go and try and go into a cabin in the wilderness in Scotland or in the woods or wherever. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Our needs. But yeah, obviously, some of you will live in parts of the world where there really is a real and present need to look after your own safety. So I'm going to talk about various things today that involve finding our boundaries. But yeah, obviously, do your own assessment of your own area. So yeah, there's a downside to this, the way the mind habitually looks for safety. There's a concept in art, defamiliarization. I think it was, I don't know much about art and art history, I'm afraid, but I think it's a phrase that's used. Some of you will know much more about this than me, I'm sure. A phrase used in literature as well. I think it might have come from literature. And the idea is how that the art can present you with familiar topics, but in a way which you see afresh. So there's that freshness of seeing, which is a lovely part of being in nature, is that ability to see with fresh eyes. Diana was talking about like the spring coming in. I remember when I first moved here, realizing that, well, in spring, every day, well, there's something new in every moment of experience, isn't there? There's a truth in that. But like in spring, every day a new flower has come out or a new bud has broken. And actually, I realized all through the year, even in like midwinter and midsummer, which are the points of relative stasis, something shifts, and every week some aspect, some animal changes its behavior. Or like as you go past midsummer here, it's like it builds up and it builds up, and then just after that, week after Midsummer's Day, there's a sort of as the land relaxes and you feel it, and then you notice that certain birds have stopped singing, or usually around midsummer, there's peregrines nest behind. Often just after midsummer, suddenly you hear the young peregrines have fledged, and they're very noisy. So there's all these little indicators. There's always something changing, and how I've just always loved that. Like I can habituate my mind. I get, particularly in work, the computer, the paper, whatever. It's like I need to do this, I need to do that. Bum bum bum. Got the family, got to make dinner, got to do, and the mind closes down, and I forget to notice all this kind of wonderful unfoldment that is happening all around me. So I've got three little check my time. Three little seeing with fresh eyes ideas. So the first one is very much links to Diana's talk, which is look again. So when you think you've seen something, look again. Yeah. There's a little exercise can go with this. These little exercises, I think, are going to go on the Padlet associated with the retreat. So the exercise. So go to somewhere you're familiar with. So I could even come out here, somewhere I'm familiar with. Anywhere you're familiar with, that's outdoors, where there's a sense of some contact with nature. Now, it works actually just as well in the city, in the built urban environment. After all, humans are also part of nature in our way. So go somewhere you're familiar with. And the first thing in this exercise is just take a look around. Notice it as familiar. Yeah. Then just take a minute, checking in with yourself, see how you feel. Then look around again. So this time, just notice those things you might have missed. So there's a branch of a birch tree, and I can just notice it's a branch of a birch tree, but I can notice as well there's a couple of quite old, there's some dead branches, and the moss is sort of hanging off it. It does look quite an old thing, actually. So I can observe the detail. And as I observe that detail, I might also become more sensually alive to like sounds or smells or other things. It's almost like when we look at one bit of detail, it opens out. So then checking with myself again, the sort of inner world, sense of being on the ground, being connected. And then a third time, look out again. And this time, see it as if for the first time. Do a little mind game. As if you've never seen the world before. Yeah. Just see if you can just contact that sense of wonder. And then if you like, you can check in with yourself again. So just a few minutes in each of those sort of iterations. There's like 3 iterations of outer and inner, each time sort of progressively moving towards more of a sense of open. So that's a little thing you can do. That's number 1. And one of my little entertainments for the last few years has been going for a swim every morning. And in the winter, believe me, it's quite cold. It doesn't matter how often you do this, it's still
You don't need to
cold.
Convince me. I believe
you. It's not that after a few months or a few weeks, suddenly it's not cold anymore. It's still cold. And one of my tricks is don't think about it. Yeah, don't think about it. Just like let your mind go. Completely empty your mind. So as I walk to the water, just like let it go. I've become much better at this. But what's fascinating is as I walk towards the water with that sense of like completely letting go, I'm not going to think, am I going to do this today or not? Maybe I'll miss a day. Just don't do any of that. Just go to the water, get in it. And there's a sort of serenity arises in that approach to the very familiar place. Because I've got the same 2 places I go every day. And there's a real serenity and openness from that thing. So anyway, that's go somewhere you're familiar with and training the mind to be open. My second suggestion is similar, and this is often our walks get slightly habitual, or the way we spend time outdoors gets slightly habitual. And I can do this. I can, just find myself going for the same walk, and either just talking to someone the whole way through, or just talking to my head, or whatever. So this is think of like a familiar walk you do, or a familiar place you go, and just go, well, is there anywhere here I've never been? If you walk to work, is there a bench you walk past that you've never sat on? Well, go and sit on it. If there's a park you go to, is there like a clump of trees that you've never been to? Or if you go for a country walk, is there like a place you can just go off the path and sit in, sorry, there's a large bird behind us, and sit in the trees, somewhere that's familiar on the one hand, but different on the other. So again, our minds are very habitual. And we talk about views. When we talk about views, we often talk about views as, we talk about views in Buddhism, don't we? Right view, wrong view. And we often mean the sort of conceptual frameworks that we use in reference to our experience when we talk about views. Actually, views are deeply emotionally held, and they're very strongly linked to habits. So I think we can link views to habit very, very, very closely. So one of the things I want to explore more this evening as well is how we can use our experience in nature to break out of our familiar behavior and actually shift our minds out of habitual behavior as well. So when we get into a position where we're just thinking through the same old storyline, the same old conversation, or these days it's often to do with politics or lockdown, isn't it, as well, our views on such like, those sorts of views, we start to notice that they are deeply familiar patterns, and that actually there's something so refreshing in the unfamiliar. So that's the second invitation. Think of somewhere you know well, but identify somewhere that you don't normally go, and see if you can contact that sense of the unfamiliar experience. Let's keep an eye on my time. So yeah, when doing this as well, just going to jump back to Vedana. Pleasant, painful, and neutral. So we've talked about neutral and how we're drawn towards pleasurable experience. With pleasurable experience, one of the interesting things about pleasurable experience is letting go of pleasurable experience, or letting go of seeking pleasurable experience. This is fascinating because pleasurable experience is great. I'm a big fan of pleasurable experience. I'm sure most of us are. When you're in nature, one of the things that you learn is if I'm like here and I'm going like here, so here I am out with Diana. It's slightly midgy, it's a bit cold, and it's a bit grey. And it was so much better if we went up into the woods over there. So easy to do, isn't it? The big view. Oh, it'd be so much better when we got up the hill. We can have the big view.
Bit of breeze to
blow away the
midges.
Yeah. Yeah. And what happens is you miss the pleasure that's in the moment. But the pleasure that's in the moment is a pleasure that fundamentally you can let go of because it's in the moment. You don't need to hold on to that experience. So this is a really interesting way of exploring pleasurable experience in nature. You don't sort of look for it as somewhere else. But once you're finding pleasure in the actual immediacy of experience, seeking after it and holding on to it no longer makes sense. So you can start to sort of let there be movement in the pleasurable experience. And lo and behold, it becomes more pleasurable. I don't need to tell you that, I'm sure. Unpleasant experience has a similar quality. I remember some years ago when we were first started doing more outdoor work on retreats, and we were doing a sesshin in the shrine room on a hill walking retreat, I think, and I thought we really good fun to meditate outside. So I thought, well, we'll do 2 or 3 sessions in the shrine room, and then we'll go outside. And this particular day in September, it was raining. Well, it started raining. That's right. It wasn't raining particularly. Then it started raining just as we got to the last session. And I thought, well, whatever. So I said, look, if you want to do the last 20 minutes sit in the shrine room, you can, because it has started raining. But I'm going to go and meditate down on the Loch shore anyway. So I got up and picked up my jacket and started walking down to the Loch shore, fully expecting to find like myself and maybe one other slightly unhinged individual. The whole retreat had followed me down to the Loch shore, and we sat there in the rain. And it was one of those beautiful, it was like completely still with gentle rain, and you could just hear the raindrops on the water. And I'm thinking, we're sitting in the rain. It's kind of wet and slightly cold. And as you sit, it's not threateningly cold. We're not going to get hypothermia. We've got a warm central heated house to go back to. But that just slowly sort of going, and actually it's really quite pleasant. So discovering the boundaries of pleasant and unpleasant experience, and being willing to stay with it, to move into that, the immediacy of those experiences. So my last way of challenging the familiar is again, this has a bit of a rider on it, because it does depend on where you live, how appropriate this is. Another way of challenging the familiar is to go to a familiar place at an unfamiliar time. Now, nighttime is the best for this. If you live in an environment where going out at night is safe, obviously. Nighttime in the countryside is just brilliant. I don't know quite. Obviously the visual sense is impaired, isn't it? And as the visual sense is impaired, the other senses come alive. You have to sort of like feel your way into the darkness. I used to go, when my children were little and would still do these sorts of things, and we would go for night walks. Actually, my son does go out for walks at night now, but you sort of feel yourself, feel your way into the darkness. Now, fear can often arise in association with being out at night. So, you know, work with your fear sensibly. If it's rational fear, don't, you know, just like call it a day. Even if it's irrational fear, work with it sensibly. But there is an edge where you can go, so I'm feeling slightly uncertain, but let me just linger, and particularly if you're in the countryside, you know, where actually the risk is low. But other animals move around at night, so you might hear the deer, or you hear something moving. So if you can let your senses move into the darkness, it's what I call the withheld experience. The night is a withheld experience. So if you can become confident with it, it's unfamiliar. There's something really special about that. Misty day, dawn. Actually, if you don't normally go out at dawn, dawn in the city is really interesting. And it's such a lovely time to be out sometimes in urban environments. So dawn is a lovely time. We were sitting out at dusk by the Loch Voil, weren't we? And it had that magical quality. Quite what it is. They talk about the gloaming in Scotland, don't they? It's like that kind of, particularly in summer when dawn and dusk are very long, and it is. You walk around and it's like it's alive. You can understand that the idea that the land has life. The idea of the fairy lore, isn't it? In Scotland,
the thin place.
the thin place.
The magic of it.
For those of you who don't know, Balquhidder is supposed to be a thin place, so a place where our world and the fairy world are particularly close, and you get that magical sense of slipping into another world. The sheep, they talk about this in Celtic languages. I think in Irish it's the she as well. Ben Sheehan is near here, the Hill of the Fairies. I could go on about that, but I'm running out of time, so best not to. So yeah, ways of challenging the familiar. So going to a familiar place and going through that iteration of looking yourself, looking again, and just seeing if you can move towards seeing with fresh eyes. That's one thing you can do. Going to somewhere you know well and going, well, where's a slightly different place I can go? And just see if I can get that sense of the familiar being unfamiliar. And yeah, going out. Well, maybe we should include challenging the familiar, going out at night, or going for a walk in the rain. If you would normally stay in, go out. What's that like? Find those ways of just sort of upturning familiar experience a little bit. And the world of Vedana, bringing the world of Vedana away from either a seeking or an anxiety based on the future, and bring the world of Vedana into a richly felt present. That's one thing about you're a swimmer as well, aren't you, Daniel? I know there's a few. I've seen the names on the screen there. There's a few swimmers. the water's cold, isn't it? But there's something so alive about that experience. So yeah.
I don't swim in the winter. I say that. I'm a swimmer. I love getting in the loch, but not in the winter without a wetsuit.
So there's an alive that the opening out the opening out the palette of our tolerance to Vedana, whether it's taking interest in the ordinary or whether it's allowing movement into that which we desire, or whether it's allowing in those things that we naturally maybe hold at bay. So opening out the palette of Vedana in the context of nature, in the context of the natural world, is such a sort of a great way of bringing something alive.